Good afternoon and welcome to the final session of day 2 of Career Bootcamp 2021. I am Joshua Frayne and I'm the National Chair of the Federal Youth Network. And in the spirit of this being a bilingual session this afternoon, I am also the Président National du Réseau des Jeunes Fonctionnaires Fédéraux. So today's segment will be on intentional communication in a virtual world. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which I am joining you from is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. The Algonquin peoples have lived on this land since time immemorial, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to be present in this territory. And Marcella, if you can kindly add the link in the chat. I recognize that many of our participants are joining us really from probably every corner of Canada. And we're all on different traditional territories. So Marcella has put a link in the chat there where you can figure out which territory you are on and have some level of thought around that. Alors, au fur et à mesure que nous progressons dans la session d'aujourd'hui, veuillez partager vos questions en utilisant le bouton questions et réponses dans la langue de votre choix. So during today's session, we would encourage you to use the Q&A function to ask any questions. We will have a very significant number of participants, so that is the best way to get your questions in. And in the chat, we would encourage you to interact with your colleagues, share your thoughts, but please do not ask any questions of the panelists in the chat because we won't be able to action those. So today we have Robert Armstrong moderating the panel discussion. Welcome, Robert. And Robert's the Atlantic Regional Manager of HR programs at Public Services and Procurement Canada out of Halifax. And I realize now that this is quite late Atlantic time. So thank you very much for joining us, Robert. And he has years of experience in working in virtual and dispersed teams before the current pandemic and continues to adapt as the virtual workplace evolves. One final note I will mention before handing it off to Robert is to please continue to share your thoughts using hashtag CBC_CDC on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. You could use it on TikTok. I just don't think there's as much TikTok take up yet for the CBC_CDC hashtag, given our demographic. After today's session from 4:30 to 5:30 in the networking space, in the virtual expo platform, we will be there and chatting with you. So if you have any questions or you just want to come and interact with your colleagues, please feel free to do so in that space. And it's a really great way to see faces, make connections, share your networking info, and get some contacts from today's session. So with that, I will hand it over to Robert to start off today's session. So thanks very much, everyone.
Thanks, Josh. Bonjour tout le monde. I just saw a note from somebody in Mi'kmaq. So good to have people speaking other languages in addition to the 2 official languages that we're going to be using today. So bienvenue tout le monde. On va aller de l'avant dans les 2 langues officielles aujourd'hui dans notre séance bilingue. There is so much for us to talk about today. I'm actually like super excited. Thanks, Marcella, for the great tunes. She's spinning the DJ thing au début de la séance, so I'm like fully engaged. I've had a long day, but it doesn't matter anymore because I'm with friends. On est entre amis, on est avec nos collègues superstars de la fonction publique du Canada. So we're going to get right into a bunch of questions, but before we do, the proper thing, I suppose, is to introduce our 3 speakers. So I'm not going to get into the long bios. Je sais que le camp de carrière vous a déjà fourni des informations sur nos conférenciers, donc c'est pas la peine de faire les présentations qui vont être trop longues. But just the same, I should be mentioning who we have. So I'm just going to start on my screen and go clockwise. I don't know if it looks the same for everybody. Mais on a avec nous aujourd'hui, d'abord, Simon Gascon. Simon is the Executive Director of Data Partnerships and Innovation Hub at the Public Health Agency of Canada. So as you know, l'Agence de la Santé publique du Canada, c'est une agence qui est pas mal occupée ces jours-ci. You might have thought that PHAC was a sleepy little agency not doing much before the pandemic, but we know that they're pretty busy now. And data, partnerships, and innovations keeps us busy as well. So I'm really thrilled to have Simon here. He has a long history of working in virtual teams. So that's one of the reasons why he's here, in addition just to being a cool guy. So bienvenue, Simon. The next person on my screen is Heather Hamilton. Heather is one of the coolest people in the West. I'm really happy to have you here, Heather. Heather's the Regional Director General of Prairie Region at the Parole Board of Canada. Again, you might have thought that the Parole Board was one of those places where just stuff got done, helping people reintegrate back into the communities. Oui, c'est vrai qu'il y a beaucoup de travail sur la réintégration communautaire qui se fait à la Commission des libérations conditionnelles du Canada. But one of the things that's super interesting for us to hear about today is Heather's experience working into a more virtual experience than before. We are, of course, working in reality, but a lot of us are working in both worlds now, both the real world and the virtual world. So bienvenue, Heather. We're really happy to have you with us here today. Notre troisième vedette de la fonction publique est avec nous. Donc, il s'agit de Annie Thériault. Annie's super virtually experienced as well. Et c'est pour ça que Madame Thériault est avec nous aujourd'hui. Elle, présentement, est membre du corps professoral à l'École de la fonction publique du Canada. And what Annie's doing at the school currently, at the Canada School of Public Service, is a lot of learning interventions on the executive learning front. So, of course, we may have people from different levels and classifications with us today. There are hundreds of people with us, by the way, panelists. And one of the things that Annie has experience with, in addition to the executive group lately, is working with people from all levels and working virtually for a good long time. So that's why we have these three amazing people and good friends with us today. In addition to a cat, I just saw a tail in Simon's screen. So there we go. This is real world, people. Off we go. So I'm just going to launch into the first question for the panelists. J'ai d'abord une question qui va commencer notre conversation aujourd'hui. C'est pour nos trois panélistes, and I'll just ask all three of them to weigh in. I'm going to start with you, Simon. So this is your kind of advance warning in a couple seconds. La question est la suivante. Caméra active ou caméra désactivée? Quand et pourquoi? So here's our question for the panelists that we'll start off with. Camera on or camera off? When and why? So Simon, give us a quick hit. What's your answer? Quelle est ta perspective?
It depends on your hairdo. Non. Sérieusement, je pense que c'est important de penser à ça puis d'avoir une bonne conversation là-dessus. Il y a des meetings qui se prêtent mieux à off, mais personnellement, je préfère avoir la caméra on because you get to see all of the nonverbal cues. And, you know, I was getting worried as winter was approaching with the pandemic because we spent a lot of time at home and isolated. And I think the camera is the next best things to in presence. Donc, moi, je préférais ça, puis ça me permettait aussi de voir le moral des employés, comment ils allaient, comment ils se sentaient, puis pouvoir poser des questions plus précises à ce niveau-là.
Intéressant. OK, je vais te revenir à toi dans une minute, mais Heather, let's go to you. What's your perspective on this? Camera on or camera off?
As a rule, I think your camera should be on. I think when you're in a meeting or a session, you're communicating with somebody online, turning your camera off is the equivalent of stepping out of the room or turning your head aside. Please turn your head aside if you're gonna sneeze, cough, blow your nose, you know, those things that don't need to get shared in a forum. But other than that, turning your camera off really is sort of the visual equivalent of turning your head away or stepping out of the room. I would say if you have some compelling reason that you need your camera to be off, then I would say to make your nonverbal cue into a verbal cue. I'm turning my camera off for a moment because, you know, whatever the reason is, and I will be right back. If you don't interrupt a meeting flow, you can always use your chat screen. That's a good message to, you know, stick in there in case somebody's wondering what happened to you. But I would say make it verbal if you do need to do it, and otherwise, as a rule, leave it on.
Intéressant. Merci, Heather. So, Heather fait partie de l'équipe caméra activée, mais si on va désactiver sa caméra, ça vaut la peine de partager la raison pourquoi avant d'éteindre la caméra. Annie, what do you think?
Ben, Robert, j'ai une opinion un peu partagée par rapport à cette question-là. Je suis d'accord avec mes collègues que oui, c'est toujours mieux avec la caméra ouverte. So, of course, I have a preference for camera on, But when I was reflecting on that question, I was thinking when I started to lead virtual teams was way back in 2003, 2004, and we didn't have cameras at the time. We conducted all our business with a teleco line only. Were those long, more boring meetings? Yes, they were, but we survived. And for years and years and years, we managed this way. So is it possible to do it without a camera? It is. Now we have, bon, ça fait quelques années qu'on a l'accès à la vidéoconférence où maintenant on a tous sur nos appareils accès à Teams, Zoom, etc. Donc, on a un luxe supplémentaire. Mais ce que je voyais moi aussi, c'est que la caméra semble répondre à tous les maux de la terre. So for all the challenges that I was reading about preparing for this, I was reading, open your camera, open your camera, open your camera. And as much as I agree, sometimes I have to eat, okay? And sometimes I'm booked back to back to back to back, and I don't want to eat in front of my camera. Sometimes too, I've seen myself on screen all day, and I've seen enough of myself all day. So I would tend to agree with Heather. I really respect when people say, look, I need to eat, so I'm just going to take a few minutes and I'll be off camera, but I'm still listening. Or, you know, give a heads up also about your expectations. So depending on the type of meeting, sometimes when you're a smaller group with your management committee, you're just a couple of you, it's really important to engage. Sometimes if there's 200 people on the line, maybe they don't need to see you, or maybe if they do, give me a heads up. I'll make sure that I stay on for you and give you the feedback you need. Alors, j'ai un peu une opinion partagée par rapport à ça. Donc, je ne suis pas certaine que ça rencontre tous les maux de la terre. Des fois, mon chat veut juste participer à la réunion, puis à un moment donné, je me tanne, je ferme un petit peu la caméra, ça se calme, je reviens. Alors, moi, j'ai un peu une opinion partagée par rapport à ça. Je pense qu'il faut qu'on respecte aussi son propre niveau de confort, mais je pense qu'aussi, c'est important qu'on reste engagé. Alors, c'est un peu une opinion partagée pour moi.
Voilà, donc ça dépend. C'est une bonne réponse à n'importe quelle question, ça dépend. So it depends is a bit of a good answer for any context as well. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this perhaps for the next hour. When are the occasions when we need it and when we don't? Simon, just to close this question, I want to come back to you for a minute. Let's say you're going for a meeting and it turns out that really the camera isn't required for everybody. Why bother to have a video meeting at all? How come we're going so far towards this and forgetting that teleconference is also an option?
Well, you know, we used to run the government using typewriters before. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, like, je suis 100% d'accord avec Annie. Comme il y a des circonstances qui font en sorte que, bon, la caméra est peut-être pas requise. Il y a des meetings aussi pour lesquels on est à l'agenda, mais on est, you know, à la 40e minute de l'heure. So why spend your time on the camera? I totally agree with this, and it allows you to multitask. Well, actually, it allows you to do something else because multitasking is not my forte other than chewing gum. So in my mind, vous voulez avoir la culture d'équipe, puis la plupart des gens vont être d'accord pour dire que la majorité des communications se passe à travers le non-verbal. Donc pour moi, c'est important d'avoir la caméra on. That being said, there are circumstances like if you're eating, especially like soup or spaghetti, or a Big Mac, or, you know, if you are not a center to the meeting and everything else. But for me, usually when I see the people that have the camera off on a meeting where we agreed to turn the camera on, then I would lean towards Heather to say, yeah, you're turning away from the meeting and you're probably focusing on something different or something else, which in some instances may be warranted, in some other instances it's not. But that's content-wise. But I think there's the content and then there's the people. And as a leader, if you haven't connected and seen your employees before in a while, it's always good to have that check-in. Now, of course, early in the morning may not be the best time to do so. Not everybody's at their best at 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. But, you know, when coffee is absorbed and you're ready to go, then it's good to have that check-in. And I also find that the meetings with the camera on are usually a lot more personable.
Voilà.
Like right now, I'm picking up the cues that I should shut up and.
Non, merci Simon, c'est très intéressant. Donc voilà un peu comme le survol de la question et dans la réponse que ça dépend. So it really does depend, and I appreciate all of your perspectives. Merci à tous les trois. because it is important for us to remember that we have good technology, most of us. Not everybody actually has the camera functional, so that's fine too. But what we need to think about is when is the camera adding some value to the interaction and when does the camera distract. So quand il y a un chat, des enfants, peut-être qu'on est en train de manger à cause de tous les décalages horaires, and we have people in every time zone, so maybe some of us are snacking and some of us aren't. That may be the time for you to turn off your camera. Mais je crois que le plus important, c'est que quand on peut se voir, on a beaucoup plus de données visuelles et il y a un peu plus d'intimité dans l'interaction entre les gens. So really, it gives us that interaction and the interactivity. Like right now, when I can see you, I feel like I'm interacting with you a little bit differently than if I weren't able to see you. So let's move on to the next topic, because I think people are reacting with some very good advice, by the way. Everybody should be paying attention to the chat if they can. Multitask, there's a lot of good feedback there. And that's interesting. Thank you, everybody, for your contributions. You'll notice that the lights just turned off automatically behind me here because I haven't done any dancing. I'll do this in a second to get them back on. So, la prochaine question pour nos panélistes est la suivante. Comment est-ce que vous gérez votre langage corporel et comment est-ce qu'on peut l'utiliser pour appuyer son message plutôt que de créer des distractions? So here's the question we're going to talk about next for a couple of minutes. How can we use our body language and manage that to support our message rather than distract it? Because we have all, frankly, moved into this visual medium, most of us anyway, for a lot of the time during our day. Some of us are back-to-back on screen all day long. And really, we want to be able to reinforce the message and support what we're doing or trying to accomplish by making use of all of the tools at our disposal. And one of that is our body language. So Heather, let's start with you. From your experiences, what are some tips you might bring to this conversation? How can we make use of our body language to support what's happening in that meeting or in that conversation?
I think as a rule, I'm not sure the rules are different working in a virtual environment than they are in a real environment, like in a live environment. The only thing I would add is that when you're working remotely, you have a limited visual range. I can only see what's in that little box. So I would say just to be mindful of what is in the frame of the camera. Lots of us talk with our hands like this. If you know you're a hand talker, then you want to make sure you position your camera so people can see your hands. Otherwise, what I'm seeing is this, right? And I have no idea what that means because I can't see all of your hands. So you know yourself to be a hand talker, frame yourself so that you can be seen. And I would say, again, it's about taking the nonverbal to the verbal so that people, in case people can't see as clearly, because right now I'm looking at you, you're all the size of a postage stamp. Do you know if I'm raising my eyebrows? Do you know if I'm giving you a frowny face? I don't know. So I would say just be more mindful of articulating it, taking your nonverbal and turning it into verbal, and also being mindful of what people can see. I think the other thing I would note is that the way our brains, let me not get too technical. I do have a comms background, but the way our brains work is when we're live is different than when we're working virtually. You access your thoughts differently. So most of us have a tendency to, you look down and to the left like this. I'm accessing my creative side. I look up to the right, I'm accessing my memory. When we're live, you're much more conscious of that and I'm keeping eye contact with you, right? But when you're on the phone, when you're you sort of at a distance, the person's not right in front of you, you have a tendency to go there more often. So if you're talking to me and I'm looking down like this, very easy for you to think, oh, Heather's not really paying attention. She's reading a book. She's, doing some other thing. So I think it's just more to be aware, much more aware and deliberate about eye contact.
Fascinating. So Heather parle beaucoup de la communication intentionnelle et de la prise de conscience de qu'est-ce qu'on est en train de faire, puis quelle air qu'on dégage, puis comment on communique avec son corps et avec son visage. So Annie, what do you have to add to this thing? I was fascinated by Heather's last comment. C'est quand on est en train de multitasker, si je peux me le permettre, le monde vous voit, right? Puis est-ce qu'on voit en haut, est-ce qu'on voit en bas? So Annie, quelle est ta perspective là-dessus?
Ben, moi, je dirais que l'important pour moi, en tout cas, c'est faites-moi sentir que vous écoutez.
Right.
So pretend you're listening, okay? Because seriously, this is important because when we're in the virtual world, we don't have a lot of feedback. And if I was to just see what I'm seeing now, I'm sitting here in my dining room and I'm talking to my laptop, okay? So technically this is what I'm doing right now. I know there's a whole bunch of you guys at the other end, but if I look at the situation, this is what I see. So I need to know someone's listening. I need to get that feedback that I would get in real life. So for me, I'm trying to make this specific effort to, nod and engage with you so you receive some sort of feedback. Because if not, sometimes I repeat myself, I don't know how many times, just because I want to make sure you get what I'm saying. And I'm not sure if you are listening to me, are you hearing me? Alors, je suis pas sûre, est-ce que vous écoutez même qu'est-ce que je suis en train de dire, parce que j'ai pas de feedback, j'ai pas de rétroaction de votre part. Alors, comme là, Robert, tu branles ta tête, là, je sais que tu viens d'écouter que je viens de dire, tu me réagis à quelque chose, mais ça prend, je pense, cette réaction-là, parce que je trouve que ça réduit l'angoisse du virtuel. Puis ça donne le sentiment que quelqu'un nous entend et nous écoute, qu'on n'est pas juste là en train de parler tout seul, peu importe où est-ce qu'on est situé. Alors, je dirais de donner un peu de rétroaction, le feedback est important. Je dirais aussi d'être naturel, d'être authentique. On n'a pas besoin d'être quelqu'un d'autre. Just be yourself, be natural, be authentic. You can react the same way you would normally. Mais comme Heather a dit, c'est sûr que quand on le voit en gros de même à l'écran, c'est pas aussi évident. Donc, moi, je recommande et j'essaye aussi de faire pour mes collègues le oui, je t'entends, je t'écoute, au moins qu'ils voient ma tête à l'écran qui dit oui, je suis là et je t'entends. Voilà.
Voilà. Et merci, Annie. So Annie souligne l'importance de la rétroaction, and I really appreciate that, Annie, because it's important, and I feel that too in the meetings that I have to go to every single day. Sometimes I don't know how people are reacting or whether they're really engaged, and so it's really nice when occasionally they might just nod their head or smile or kind of give me a little bit of feedback that we're actually having a conversation more than me just going on a monologue. So that's an excellent point.
You can even unmute to say, sometimes.
There you go, right? And it's okay that you're not with me every single moment of the way, but just the occasional kind of acknowledgement that, yep, you're at least partly there is awfully nice to have. Et ça va de même dans les réunions comme physique dans le vrai monde, right? It's not that much different from the old days when we used to have meetings in the real world. You don't have to be with me for the whole 60 minutes that we might be sitting in the boardroom, but the occasional kind of head nod or, yeah, that's a good point, helps me know that we're at least moving things along. Simon, last point to you, make it quick. Any last thoughts on this question?
Well, one of the things we haven't touched upon is the equipment. And I think that is a very, very valuable point to make in the sense that, so I started my new job not too long ago, and I'm dealing with some employees, and one of which I use as my example because she doesn't mind and she understands what the point is, but she's working on her kitchen island off a laptop. So one of the things is that, and I see in the chat, there's a lot of people putting all kinds of comments about, well, I'm shy on camera, I'm this, I'm that. Well, if you were in the office, you wouldn't have a choice. You'd be in the meeting, right? So whether you scratch your head, bite your lip, look funny or have a bad hairdo, you'd be in the meeting because you'd be at work. So, but one of the issues that people don't think about is, how am I set up? Am I at my best performance? Donc, quand on travaille virtuellement, une des choses qui est importante à se rappeler, c'est que vous êtes 5 jours semaine devant ces écrans-là, devant la caméra, en rencontre pour la plupart de nous, etc., etc. Let me make a quick parallel. If I was to say that, Robert and I are going to start biking 5 days a week for the next year, and Robert doesn't have a bike, are we going to go get a bike at Canadian Tire? Or are we going to go into one of those specialized shops and get a very decent bike, since we're going to do it 5 days a week, 37.5 hours a day? So think about the equipment that you have, the camera, the headset. My wife works behind me, so my headset has noise canceling in the headphones and also in the microphone. The camera is set up between my 2 screens. I have a sit-stand desk. As you see, I'm moving around because I'm on my feet. I'm not sitting down because I'm getting old and I have back problems. Mais c'est ça aussi qui fait en sorte que vous allez avoir un plus grand niveau de confort ou pas à travailler sur la caméra.
Excellent. So I want to talk to you all as managers just for a minute, and I'm going to do a little bit of a sub question here. So we're veering off of our plan. I'm just warning you now. because there are a few questions in the Q&A that I find very, very valuable to hit right now. And that's when we're dealing with employees or colleagues who have some anxiety about being on camera, right? Because this is our virtual space and there's some anxiety about maybe, you know, their workspace is an awkward spot, or maybe they just don't like watching themselves on camera, or maybe they're just a little bit shy to be on there all the time. And there's also other things about, you know, the barrier that we're confronted with by interacting this way on a regular basis. So as a manager, how can you actually help one of those employees feel less anxious? Comment est-ce que vous allez encadrer la personne? Comment est-ce que vous allez communiquer avec l'employé pour que lui ou elle sache comment mieux interagir avec notre nouvelle technologie? Annie, let's start with you. How can we actually help that person feel, to kind of get over that hump and feel more comfortable?
Bien, je dirais, Robert, premièrement, une des choses qui arrive qui augmente peut-être cette angoisse-là ou cette anxiété-là, c'est le fait de ne pas avoir le contrôle. Donc, on a le sentiment qu'on n'a pas le contrôle sur l'environnement. Ça peut créer de l'angoisse, de la frustration, des problèmes de concentration aussi parfois. Alors, moi, je conseillerais d'y aller avec des baby steps. So to regain control over your work environment, because it's just a new environment technically. It's just to learn how to maneuver with the new parameters and get used to that. Et pour certaines personnes, ça peut prendre plus de temps ou ça peut être un niveau d'angoisse plus élevé. Alors moi, j'aurais tendance à conseiller d'y aller à petits pas, tranquillement, pas vite. Premièrement, peut-être commencer en équipe de 2 ou de 3, en petits groupes, ou y aller avec des périodes peut-être moins longues pour s'habituer. Il y a probablement aussi des façons. Moi, je n'ai pas trouvé comment enlever ma face de l'écran sur toutes les plateformes, mais si je pouvais le faire, je le ferais plus souvent. Donc, il y a peut-être des trucs que je ne connais même pas, tu vois, qui seraient à examiner, je dirais. Alors, j'irais peut-être de façon à s'habituer tranquillement. Pour reprendre l'analogie de Simon, là, moi, je ne pense pas que je ferais du vélo 3 heures les 5 jours la première semaine. Je commencerais peut-être par 1 heure par jour, puis là, j'augmenterais tranquillement la cadence. Alors, j'utiliserais peut-être ce même mécanisme-là, je dirais, pour essayer d'habituer les collègues ou de se rendre plus à l'aise à ce niveau-là. Prendre le temps aussi d'essayer des choses, hein, parce que des fois, on veut que ce soit parfait du départ. So instead of just pretending we can be perfect the first time, why not try different environment, try different devices maybe, try different platforms and see where your level of comfort is. Parce que maybe within your team, you don't need to use whatever. If this platform works well for everybody, you do have a choice now. So explore a little bit, find what's your level of comfort, and why not all decide to use this if it works better for us. Alors, j'irai petit à petit en s'acclimatant tranquillement, pas vite, et en y allant ou en respectant le rythme des gens, encore une fois.
C'est très intéressant, puis ce qu'Annie nous dit, the importance of going step by step, the baby steps, as she says, and really taking things one day at a time to get people used to the new platforms, the new technologies, and this new way of working, which is not new for most of us around this table, but which is new for a good portion of the folks that we're working with. So c'est de très bons points. Merci, Annie. Let's move on to the next question for a second. And I'm looking forward to hitting some of those questions that are in the Q&A. There's a lot of also, by the way, c'est pour tout le monde, good advice. The chat is full of good advice. So if folks aren't paying attention to that, you really want to get in there and scroll up, scroll down, look at the great tips that everybody is sharing. Il y a de très bons points qui sont partagés par tous nos gens, tous nos participants aujourd'hui dans l'espace de clavardage. So the next question I want to talk about with the three panelists, Heather, I'm going to come to you first on this one, which is kind of bringing us up to a more general kind of a conversation now. Let's talk about communication in general, not just in the virtual world, but what is good communication? You've had a long career working with different people in different contexts. You have a comms background, which is why I'm coming to you first. So if anybody around this table should have a good definition, working definition of good communication, what is it and what are the key aspects of it for you?
I think a key piece of good communications is remembering that you are the person speaking, the person who's doing the communications is the owner of the message. So as the person communicating, it is my job to make sure that you understand what I'm saying. It's not your job to figure out what I mean. It's my job to be clear that you understand. Otherwise, for example, I could just come here, talk Swahili and say, well, that's your problem, you figure it out, right? So it's my job to make sure. And I think once you sort of absorb that idea, then it will prompt you to ask questions. I think that you're saying this, can you confirm if this is what you're saying? I think articulating your intention is important. This is something I've struggled with because I'm often asking a question and people think I'm challenging them. So I will say to my team, why are we doing this? And they say, oh, I'm so sorry, we don't have to do that. And I think, no, I'm actually asking you. I really do want to know. So I think being aware of some of those things in your own communications and being able to tell people, now I will say that, I'd like to learn some more about this. So can you help me understand? And reframing my communications to avoid that so that my intention is part of what I'm saying. And also just understanding it's my job to confirm if I have been understood, you know. So are you following me? Is that clear for you? Would it help if I summarize that? So just making sure the other person has received your message and follows it. And I think we over assume. I noticed this very much difference between English and French. Big difference. English is intensely heavy with nonverbal communications. Most English speakers know over 600 different nonverbal signs and symbols. In French, it's a little bit closer to 300. And it makes a really, really big difference. So I think, again, it's taking the nonverbal into the verbal. When I say that, what I mean is, and articulating that and getting that kind of clarity.
That's brilliant. You just blew my mind, Heather, because now I'm thinking for those of us who are bilingual, that's a lot. That's like 900 different nonverbal cues that we've got. Yeah, thank you for that. So, ce qui est intéressant.
I will say quickly that those nonverbal cues also vary greatly according to culture, according to age, according to demographics. But one of the things I always tell people is this: what is this? What does this symbol mean? And depending on your age, you'll get a different answer. For folks from the 60s, will tell you it's the peace sign. Seniors will tell you it's V for victory from World War II. Little kids will tell you it's bunny, right? If you work in the restaurant industry, that means 2. All right, I'd like 2 drinks. So it really does vary immensely. And even within the culture, those things aren't universal. So the more you can go from the nonverbal into the verbal, the better off you are.
Lovely. So, ce que Heather dit, c'est qu'il y a de différentes interprétations pour le même message, que ce soit verbal ou bien avec notre langage corporel. Et notre interprétation dépend beaucoup de notre génération, notre éducation, même nos origines. Donc, c'est très intéressant et ça nous amène vers une conversation sur l'intentionnalité. Donc, on parle d'une communication intentionnelle. So, Annie, how can we make sure that our communication is more intentional, as Heather is alluding to? What can you do to make sure that your intent is better understood?
Well, Heather was right when she said you need to be clear. So she stole my words there for sure. Clarity is a must, especially in the virtual world, because you have less chances of bringing up cues to compensate your lack of clarity sometimes. Alors, je pense que ça vaut vraiment la peine d'insister et d'être vraiment clair. Et autre chose aussi qui se produit au niveau virtuel, c'est qu'on a tendance à être moins empathique envers les gens virtuellement qu'on l'est en personne. Et ça, étrangement, c'est assez bien documenté dans la littérature. Et j'ai trouvé ça intéressant et je me suis demandé, mais comment développe-t-on de l'empathie quand on travaille en ligne? Parce que c'est vrai que c'est moins naturel. Donc, apparemment que c'est ça, on a moins d'empathie, il y a moins d'émotion dans la communication quand on n'est pas en personne. So, for lack of empathy and lack of emotions when you communicate virtually, I was thinking, oh my God, how do you do that? Well, again, giving some feedback is another good way of adding some empathy and, have this kind of relationship with people, not presume sometimes that because they go offline, it's for this or this or that. You don't know what's going on in their house. You don't know how many kids, how many pets. Is there someone at the door? Is there an emergency? Like you need to stop presuming or make up stories for what you don't know or what you don't say or what you don't hear, etc. Alors, je pense que ça, c'est une des façons de s'ajuster. Puis aussi, je me disais, au niveau de l'émotion, comment peux-tu ajouter de l'émotion? So I'm asking the question, I don't think I have that answer figured out yet, but I for sure was able to notice that we do have less emotions in virtual communications than in person. I think it's for each of us to find out how can we reach out. Et pour revenir à ce que Simon disait plus tôt, le check-in avec les gens, j'essaie pour ma part, pour ajouter à cette émotion-là qu'on n'a pas virtuellement, d'aller m'assurer de poser les questions ou d'avoir le chit-chat temps avant les réunions. Je trouve que les débuts de réunion en ligne, c'est plus abrupt. Les fins de réunion, c'est comme « Ah, je suis en retard pour mon autre meeting, bye », puis ça clique. On n'a plus le « Ah, ben, il faut que j'aille, bye », puis tout ça. Alors, j'essaie vraiment d'aller avec les gens au début des réunions, faire « Comment ça va? How is everybody? » Juste faire un petit mise en situation. Et même chose à la fin, garder le temps pour voir, ben, avez-vous des plans ce soir? On se revoit la semaine prochaine. Tu sais, apporter la dimension humaine. So bring back the human dimension in the virtual context. This is what I'm trying to figure out at this point.
Je trouve ça très intéressant. Merci, Annie. So Heather has brought out this idea of being more intentional in your communication, right? And making sure that your body language, your facial expressions, and your words communicate your intent a little bit better. Annie souligne le fait que il y a toujours de l'humanité dans notre communication. So we're talking about now about humanity and empathy. And I think your point, Annie, is very well made there. There's perhaps less empathy available, at least readily available. Perhaps we have to work harder at it in this virtual space. I find that fascinating. So Simon, let's add a third thing to the mix. So we have intentionality, we have empathy and humanity. What do you want to put into this pot?
Sure, thanks, Robert. After the great minds of Heather and the great mind of Annie, Simon say something smart. Appreciate it. Building on those points, though, I'd like to bring the following. So we all have unconscious biasness, right? Whether, like Heather said, it's from the culture or whether it's the way you've grown up. And I think one of the things that we've noticed, and I've studied this a little bit, is the fact that we are communicating now through means of communication, such as video conferencing and not in person. Those biasness and tendencies seems to be kind of exponentially promoted. So if I'm an insecure person, and Robert is my boss, and I send something to Robert and he doesn't reply to me, I'm starting to worry what's going on. But I didn't ask Robert to reply to me. I sent him a briefing note, and you know what? He sent it right away because it was so good. So those are things that are very, very important to be conscious of, and to also be mindful that you will have that same issue from the person receiving the communication. Un de mes gestionnaires m'avait mis au fait d'une technique de gestion dont lui faisait la promotion au sein de son équipe. Je trouve ça super intéressant. C'est always assume that the person is well-intended communication. Voilà. Donc ça, je trouvais ça vraiment intéressant. Ça donnait des bons résultats aussi dans l'équipe parce que justement, à cause des médiums de communication qui changent, à cause des situations changeantes, puis le fait qu'on ne se voit pas toujours, ça peut devenir un enjeu. Les intentions sont importantes. Et puis, moi, j'essaie d'y aller avec la règle suivante qui me sert bien. Je ne sais pas d'où ça vient. Je ne sais même pas si c'est scientifique. But feel free to challenge it the way you want. But it works for me, and it worked in my management experience for the past 10 years as executive. People in a conversation will retain 33% of what you said, will interpret 33% of what you said, and will forget 33% of what you said. And the last 1%, I don't know what happens to it.
Wow.
So if somebody is briefing someone on what you've said, then it goes down to 33% of what they say is actually retained, 33% is interpreted, and 33% is forgotten. Donc, quand on prend ça en considération et qu'on va avoir des intentions délibérées pour mener à une action, à un résultat concret, l'importance de la validation de l'information, going back to validate. So in what we've discussed today in the meeting, in what we've discussed between you and I, so what are the next steps concretely, and do we agree on those next steps? And agreeing on shared notes or on documenting or just a validation or appreciation verbally, if need be, is always, always, always a good thing. So remembering that 33, 33, 33 kind of helps you gauge in terms of, so what are my main key points? If I'm calling Heather, what is the 1, 2, or 3 things that I really want Heather to go away with in probably the super fun conversation that we're going to have? And if I'm calling Annie, knowing Annie and having worked with her before, I know the conversation will start with, this is what we need to talk about. And then we'll go, so how you doing and everything else. And then we're going to come back to, okay, we really need to settle on what we needed to talk about, right? So focusing on that and being very intentional about it.
I love it, right? Simon souligne le fait que l'intentionnalité, ça comprend aussi la validation de la communication. I love that. So we've got from Heather the idea of being intentional about things, thinking clearly about what it is that you're trying to communicate. Annie, making sure that the human element, right? Empathy is front and center and always sitting in the background. Simon, I love that tip. It's about also making sure that you validate and check in with the people you're working with here virtually, that you've actually communicated a message and that you now have a shared understanding of what that message was, right? Best practices actually here virtually, but also back in the real world whenever we get back to that, if ever we do. Leaving a meeting, making sure that everybody's leaving on the same page or using the same shared understanding, not a bad thing to do. Want to move us on to the next topic, and I'm watching some of the questions that we're going to go to in a minute. Brilliant. We have the most engaged audience that I've been with in a long time. Merci tout le monde. J'apprécie beaucoup l'engagement de tous les gens qui sont avec nous aujourd'hui. How can we build up that trust? So Annie already brought up that idea of being empathetic. Mais comment est-ce qu'on va utiliser notre langage corporel, notre choix de mots même, toute notre communication? Comment est-ce qu'on va l'utiliser, toutes ces choses-là, pour instaurer la confiance? How are we going to build up that trust on our teams? Annie's unmuted. She must have something to say. Annie, go ahead.
Not necessarily, Robert, but I think trust also depends on the relationships you're going to create with people. So not to bring back the points I already made, but to me, it's about reaching out to the different people, the people you're talking to, being able to adjust your vocabulary, making sure again that people understand what you're saying, as has been mentioned. You can probably explain acronyms in the chat now. So you have other tools now to clarify your communication in a context. So for example, if you know you have onboarding new employees, make sure that it is understood or that you have someone on the line that can do that type of work in the background. Ou maintenant, j'ai assisté à des réunions où est-ce que c'est encore plus facile, ça devrait être plus facile d'être bilingue parce que quand la personne parle une langue, l'autre personne tape dans l'autre langue pour les gens qui ne parlent pas cette langue-là. Donc, il y a toutes sortes d'outils. La technologie, des fois, c'est plus difficile, mais ça permet aussi d'atteindre des choses qui vont nous permettre d'atteindre peut-être ce niveau-là de confiance et que des fois, on ne pense peut-être pas à utiliser parce que ça ne fait pas encore partie de nos pratiques de plus en plus, mais on est encore en train, on dirait, d'évoluer là-dedans. Donc, je pense que c'est vraiment de miser sur s'ajuster, s'adapter aux gens et aussi à la technologie qu'on utilise.
Intéressant. Heather, how do you build trust in your teams when you're communicating in this very virtual, dispersed, kind of distanced way?
I think investing in the time to make those human connections that normally happen elsewhere is really important. When we're in a virtual world, we come into a meeting and we all sit separately until the moment the meeting is connected. If, for example, we were all sitting together in an auditorium, instead of listening to that very cool music we were all enjoying, we would be chatting with each other. Hey, how's your day going? Did you catch that bit of news yesterday? We would be making those sort of human connections. So I think building that space in at the front of the meeting, doing check-ins, emotional check. How are people doing? Hey, I heard you got a new puppy, or you were working on some renos. How did that go? Making a conscious investment to make those little quick connections part of your meetings is really important. I've done some scheduled coffee breaks where the only rule is we're not talking about work. We're just talking about other things. So just making sure that you build those things in. I think just one other point that I wanted to raise here and going back to a couple of questions is we shouldn't try to ask for what we want. If I've sent you something and I want you to answer me, then I should be saying, could you please acknowledge that you have received this? Or I would like to know if you think that this is okay. My own boss laughs at me a little bit because when I write to him, I tell him what I want. This is brilliant and I'd like you to admire it. That's what I'm looking for. Or I need your comment on this, or this is for decision. I need you to. So I think it's totally fair game to ask for what you want in communications, so that there is some clarity. I just need you to respond that you got this. I just want to hear that you think this is okay. or you know what, I'm good. This is for info and you know, doesn't require a response.
Heather, that's brilliant advice. Je trouve que les conseils que Heather vient de nous apporter s'appliquent également à notre vie privée. Donc, tu sais, même en famille, si on ne communique pas avec les gens avec qui on habite, nos besoins, puis nos désirs, puis nos besoins, comment est-ce qu'on devra, comment est-ce qu'on va être en mesure de nous aider, effectivement. So that's it. It's all about that clear communication and making sure people know what it is that you want. We're going to go to some questions and answers, or just some of the Q&A in a second. But before, let's have a little bit of fun. First, I just want to highlight the fact that the people who are participating in the chat are putting in such valuable and good advice. Puis j'apprécie tellement l'empathie qui est vraiment évidente dans la conversation. It's clear that people have been paying attention to their colleagues and their team members and even their clients, right? We're often working in difficult circumstances, and I'm seeing a lot of empathetic, kind of appreciative comments about the challenges that people are facing from working from home. So, merci tout le monde. Il y a de très bons conseils puis de très belles observations partagées dans le clavardage. So before we go to some other questions and try and address some of them, one thing that you think we should avoid doing. So maybe think about something you've seen happen or something you've done yourself, and you wish, oh dear, that hadn't happened. So Simon, let's start with you. Qu'est-ce que nous devrions tous éviter de faire lorsque nous sommes en virtuel?
It ties in nicely to what Heather and Annie have already said, Rob, and it's to avoid the ill intention or de prêter des intentions à quelqu'un au niveau des communications. So interestingly enough, you know, building trust, we've covered the topic, but building trust at the operational level, building trust when you're an executive, you know, there's many different ways of doing so. But one of the things that I try to put forth is the fact that, remember Lincoln, I think it's Lincoln who said, he who doesn't lie doesn't have to remember what he said. So, and you know, there's some very, very good Buddhist mantras or anything else, but it's try to be that genuinely nice person in the work that you do. You'll reach out to, geez, I feel like I'm name dropping, but you know, Gandhi's way of saying, you know, be the change you want to see in the world. So the nicer you are yourself, the nicer you bring it out of people surrounding you, the nicer overall it's going to be. So when you receive that little email that rubs you the wrong way, that communication, that meeting that just makes you feel awkward or anything else, take that step to reach out to that person and say, hey, you know what, like at that meeting or that email, not sure what happened, but here's how I felt about it. And really put it out on the table. Ça revient un peu à ce que Heather disait tantôt, à savoir, tell me what you want. Well, if I'm going to tell you what I want, I'm also going to tell you how you make me feel. And have that open communications. Don't avoid at all costs prêter des intentions aux gens avec qui vous travaillez. Go for the facts.
C'est un très bon point, right? Soyez généreux avec notre interprétation de ce que le monde fait puis ce que le monde veut communiquer. Annie, qu'est-ce qu'on devrait éviter? What else should we avoid doing?
Dans un autre registre, là, moi, j'ai le mal des transports. Alors, si tu m'apportes avec ton téléphone cellulaire en Teams à travers de ta maison pendant qu'on parle puis que tu marches tout le temps, là, j'ai littéralement mal au cœur. So, please don't do that. Comme là, je vois Simon se promener puis ça va parce qu'il reste comme dans le carré, là. Mais quand tu amènes le carré et que ça bouge en même temps, I'm sorry, I just can't. Like, it's just too much. So, try to stay still a little bit. If you move within your square, that's fine, but don't bring the square all across your house. I just can't. I just can't. I tried, I can't. So I'm sorry. Yeah.
Voilà. So there we just experienced a gentle coaching moment from Annie, which is it's okay to be moving within your screen, but don't take us on a tour of the house, right? Turn the camera off while you have to go sign for the package that's just arrived at the door, because that's cool. We all have to do that. Just, I don't need to take the trip with you visually because I'm going to get a little bit seasick on the way to your door and on the way back. C'est un bon français, là. Puis j'en suis coupable. Guilty as charged. I'll remember next time, sorry. Heather, what's one thing we should avoid?
N'oubliez pas qui est présent, par exemple, dans ton réunion. So don't forget the forum that you're in, because you can get a little divorced from it. Right now, I can see 3 people. So we're having a nice little chat between friends. Let me not forget the 600 other people, right, who are also listening. I know I've been present in a meeting where people got chatting and forgot where they were, and you sort of see the other people edging out of the room because they've wandered into a very personal conversation that shouldn't be happening in that room. So just don't forget the forum that you're in, and also be mindful of that when you're responding. I was in a meeting a few days ago that had about 20 people in it. And then somebody said something important and very personal, and I thought I want to respond to this, but at the same time I don't want to embarrass this person. So just being very mindful that who you can see and the person who you have eye contact with, there's a bunch of other people who you may not be looking at, and you're talking appropriately to that forum.
Oh my gosh, c'est un très bon conseil, parce que c'est vrai que si on est vraiment engagé comme présentement, moi avec vous 3, on risque d'oublier qu'il y a d'autres gens qui participent et qui sont présents. Moi aussi, je faisais partie j'étais présent pour une réunion où que la conversation est devenue un peu trop personnelle parce que le monde avait oublié qu'il y avait d'autres membres comme moi présents. And I really don't need to hear about your undergarments, honestly. Même si c'est intéressant des fois, right? So it's easy to forget, right, that we're together. So one thing though, again, I'll highlight the chat. Je trouve que le monde est très, très understanding. On est tous dans le même bateau, comme on dit, and I feel that there's a lot of empathy going around. So I'm going to, conscious of time, I'm going to go to the questions. I'm going to just highlight some of them. So here's a real question, and I appreciate this personally, so I'd like to have one of you address this. Let's go to Annie. We'll start with this one with you. The question comes from Robert Hudson. For those of us who are on back-to-back meetings all day, right? All day. How can we avoid that burnout of doing virtual meetings all day long?
I'm not sure you can avoid it. But there's certainly some tricks. And one of the latest one that I've read about that I didn't try yet, but I will definitely try, was to try stuff like go for a meeting walk. So on Teams, if you give a heads up in advance and you can actually get away with a closed camera, why don't you use that time to take some fresh air and to walk? And that's a walking meeting. We used to do that in the past as well. And it doesn't mean that you have more distraction if you're walking than if you are at the office or at home. So it is definitely something I want to try, because sometimes I just need to move around for me to be sitting. I felt that at the office, I can move around a little bit more maybe, that at home I tend to sit more for some reason. So this is definitely one thing that I will try to execute and see if this can work for me. But again, as Andrew mentioned, it's important to give a heads up. So if it's not the good meeting, if you need all sorts of screens in front of you, if you need to consult documents, or maybe you can delegate that part to someone else in your team while you take that meeting walking around. So innovations like that, it can seem simple, but it is an innovation in itself, right? So find, I think, what works for you. And in terms of multitasking, I don't think, sometimes I can and sometimes I cannot, because I want to focus on what is being said. But sometimes a way to focus is also to be away from the screen. So sometimes I will take a meeting on my phone when I don't need to be on camera again, or I will put it there in the laundry room and I'll fold the laundry at the same time as I listen. And my hands moving in the movement of being occupied with my hands or with my body will help me focus on a meeting, where if I just sit down, I'll zoom out and I'll disconnect totally. So that breaks the cycle, that breaks the rhythm. And I think a little bit of tips like that can maybe be helpful to help prevent that burnout.
Ça, c'est de bons conseils. Si on n'est pas obligé d'être sur la caméra, d'être visualisé, c'est ça.
C'est de faire la part des choses, discriminer pour voir. Tu ne peux pas faire ça toujours, mais des fois, c'est possible. Donc, quand est-ce que c'est possible de le faire pour briser le rythme du être assis devant l'écran toute la journée?
Justement. One piece of advice that I would share with people is give people some time back. The thing schedules things by half hours or hours, but you don't have to go up to the top of the hour. Give me my 5 minutes to go heat up my coffee. C'est vraiment apprécié d'avoir quelques minutes pour moi, pour mes besoins personnels entre mes réunions. Et ça peut m'aider, moi, à éviter mon épuisement professionnel à la fin de la journée.
Robert, je peux-tu rajouter là-dessus? Juste super important. I've given conferences to many departments on maximizing your performance at work. And one of the feedback that I get all the time is, Simon, I'm overloaded now. And it's not just the back-to-back meeting, it's the emails that are constantly going up and everything else. You have to think about the fact that we've been thrown through this pandemic to work from home really quickly. For some people, it's like you've never swum in your life, throw you in the middle of the pool, you're not training, you're getting out, you're trying to figure out how to work this through. And one of the things I want you to also consider for everyone on the call is, when I was at work in the office, si mon ami Robert m'avait appelé pour aller prendre un café, mettons à 10 heures, je serais parti avec Robert, j'aurais été prendre un café à 10 heures. Oui, j'aurais eu mon téléphone avec moi, j'aurais peut-être checké à un moment donné, mais j'aurais pris le temps d'avoir le plaisir d'avoir une bonne discussion avec Robert, qui est toujours intéressant à jaser. Puis, je serais revenu au bureau par la suite. Même chose avec Annie ou Heather. If they invited me for lunch, I'd be gone for lunch for an hour. And so one time I was talking to this dad who said, I felt like I was a bad father because my son asked me to help him with his math problem at home, and I felt bad because I wasn't online. Guys, take a breather.
Voilà.
J'ai parlé avec des sous-ministres adjoints aussi qui commencent plus tôt le matin, qui finissent plus tard le soir, because they don't have to transition from work to home or home to work. That's not helpful. You need to manage your time off, and you need to take care of yourself and be careful about you could sit all day and not notice that you've been sitting for 8 hours in a row. Donc, il faut faire vraiment attention à ces choses-là. C'est très, très important comme réflexion.
Merci, Simon. We only have a couple of minutes left, perhaps 3 if we push it. Heather, I'm going to come to you. Remembering that this is part of Career Bootcamp, right? Think about our careers and think about the fact that this is now our professional space, right? Back in the day when I used to come to the office, I would make sure I dressed appropriately and I conducted myself appropriately because it was all networking all day long and I wanted to project a particular image. But now we're doing it here, right? So what's your advice for people when it comes to actually moving their career forward, and what can you say is to kind of sum things up in this virtual space? What's your best advice for them?
I think I would say it's always best if you can clarify expectations. And as a manager, that for me is totally fair question. I know employees are always worried that people are going to think I'm challenging them, or, I'm up to something, whatever. Just ask and clarify expectations. My observation is that employees are usually much more stringent on themselves than managers would be. And it's fair to ask that question. I have told my staff, which I probably shouldn't say in open forum, but I will anyway, I honestly couldn't care less what hours they work. As long as their work is getting done, as long as they're not overworking themselves, it doesn't make a particle of difference to me what hours they work. So you're going to take an hour in the afternoon and help your kid with their homework. If you want to take a pause at some point and go have a walk. I have an employee who has young children. She spends the afternoon with her kids. They go to bed. She works a couple more hours. I got another who's a night owl. She does her financial reports at 2. Honestly, it doesn't make a particle of difference to me. And I said to my employees, as long as your work is getting done, as long as I don't see you overworking yourself, you will never hear from me about your hours. If I didn't say that, and if they did not ask the question, then maybe they would be holding themselves to a different standard. As Simone says, you wanted to go for a cup of coffee in the week, you would just go, right? You wouldn't go, oh my gosh, I'm a terrible person because I took a 10. You would just do it. So I would just say, always just ask for clarification. What's the dress code? Ask that question all the time. Is it okay if I step out? Will you be taking a break? Ask that too. Our executive meetings, our chairperson says that we don't have breaks scheduled. If you need a coffee, just get up, go get a coffee, right? You need 5 minutes, just head to the bathroom. We don't need to hear about it. Asking what the expectations are and putting forward your own suggestions. Never hesitate to do that.
Okay, so clarify expectations. Heather, you're going to get a lot of CVs and resumes anyway, because apparently the chat just blew up and everybody now wants to work for you. N'embarras du choix éventuellement, Heather. Tout le monde veut travailler avec toi. Annie, we're at the end of our time, so I'm going to go to you first, and then Simone, coming to you.
Very quickly, Robert, the key to job searching for me would be to tell everybody who wants to listen to you, it takes a minute to say, hey, if you hear any opportunity, I might be looking, and specify what you're looking for, and just people can spread the word and network will work its magic.
Lovely. So, le réseautage professionnel, ça se fait même au virtuel. Merci, Annie. And Simon, how can we finish this up? What are you going to give us as your last golden nugget?
I think with the virtual world, we have this opportunity of hiring coast to coast and leveraging the best talents across Canada. I don't care where you work from. Like Heather said, the hours of work, how flexible, as long as I can rely on you to deliver what you said you were going to deliver when you said you were going to deliver it. In terms of the dress code, you know what? At the end of the day, my wife says you need 2 sets, Lululemon for home, Lululemon for work. So I'm not too worried about that either. But really, it's how to make the best out of this. And at the end of the day is how to not lose that human touch and human connection. So thank you very much today for everybody who participated. I've enjoyed reading the comments as well. They were amazing. And my background, for those of you who've asked the questions, I see at some point, because I've changed it, it was the point of conversation. It's actually where I live. So there you go. That's why I have it.
There you go. Hey, oh my gosh, I don't know about everybody else, mais je veux vraiment passer le reste de ma soirée avec vous autres. Là. Comme c'est vraiment, non, c'est le highlight de ma semaine, là, Annie. So I want to really honestly and genuinely from the bottom of my heart, thank you for your sincerity and your honesty, your engagement. And I'm not talking just to Simon and Annie and Heather, I'm talking to you all. This chat space, the questions, hundreds of which we couldn't get to, incredible. There's a lot of great experience, expertise, and compassion across the public service. J'aime beaucoup le fait que tout le monde a partagé sa passion, son engagement et son empathie envers les collègues, les clients et même la gestion. So j'apprécie beaucoup, beaucoup la grande participation. Thanks everybody for being so participatory today. I've had the best Wednesday ever. Go do your networking, enjoy the rest of Career Bootcamp. Profitez-en. Le camp de carrière, c'est vraiment quelque chose de spécial dans la fonction publique du Canada. On est vraiment chanceux de faire partie de cette équipe-là. Thanks everybody for coming and enjoy the rest of your evening, afternoon, whatever it is chez vous.